Hello everybody. Welcome. I'm grateful and humbled to have a chance to evade the car that's about to run me over. And is speeding in a neighborhood. And the chance to explore and learn together again. And one thing that may not be apparent to my listeners is that it really is a privilege for me, and something I take very seriously and look forward to. It's one of the few joys in my current experience when I make these recordings, and part of the reason for that is that whether or not we're able to sit together in a physical circle, which would be wonderful and amazing, and share together and ask questions and explore, when I begin to make these recordings, I feel the presence of many beings with me. And this is a similar experience that I have when I write, or when I create music, or when I'm playing music. Sometimes when I'm doing Tai Chi, sometimes in meditation, but almost always when I'm making these recordings. And it may seem that I'm lecturing from a catalog of things I have learned, or I know, or I have discovered, or I've had insight about. And that's partly true, but the important thing is the same thing that happens when someone is dancing. When we are dancing, physically dancing, or even if you know, we are a person who cannot dance for some reason, still sometimes our heart dances, our spirit is dancing, and we experience joy and liberation from worry and concern, fear, pain, impoverishment. When I'm making these videos, part of me is dancing. And so it's not merely a lecture from a catalog. Ordinarily, I have some organizing idea or two or three that I may wish to cover. Sometimes I discover, and that's a really interesting word, it can be broken down into disk over Y, meaning like arms upraised to the source of being around here, the sun. A disk is over me, and I am in communion with the disk, the circle of life, of origin, of intelligence, of awareness, of liberation. And so, when I am speaking and making recordings, it's a special time for me, and I deeply enjoy it. And as I said, there aren't too many things I'm deeply enjoying these days, so it's a good feeling, and it feels like I'm doing something that's actually meaningful, even though, as most of you know, I have very few listeners. You are a very small cohort for the moment, and perhaps for a long time. So when I am having this experience and when I am present in this way, I am learning too. And I may be reflecting on things I've discovered or have learned, but to articulate them is a different experience than being aware of them. And it helps to remind me of what I have learned and discovered. And it also helps to encourage me to embody those learnings, to enact them, and not merely have the words or the description. So, that's my prologue for this evening. A long time ago, I read Musashi, the historical novel about Musashi's life. And it had a pretty big impact on me. I was young and impetuous, in my early 20s, living in Santa Rosa. I had heard a little bit about Rinzai Zen and koan study, and I was flush with excitement about the possibility of resolving koans. Of course, first I had to find a Zen teacher, and I was able to find one much more quickly and conveniently than I had imagined, because there was one living 2 blocks away from the bookstore where I bought this book. And older guy there in his 40s, very deep in his way, very wise in his way. He asked me, how did you like the book? Because he'd ordered it for me. Back then, you had to go to bookstores to order books. There wasn't an internet yet. And I said, it's amazing. I think I'm going to sell all my books and go to Japan and study Zen. He said, well, you could do that if you want, but there's a Zen teacher around the corner. I get off work in half an hour. Why don't you come back and we can go, I'll introduce you. So he did, and it turned out that the Zen teacher around the corner was John Tarrant Roshi, a now fairly widely known presence in the Western Zen circle. And so I studied with him for a while until there was a little crisis in the tiny Sangha we had about 8 people. Ishmael's wife was one of them, and I had produced a newsletter for them. I was a typesetting expert, and I showed the newsletter to the people after our Zen sitting, and she got quite angry with me and said, "What are you doing? I haven't even seen this yet. This is my project, blah, 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 blah." And I became quite upset, and then I also was upset because the teacher didn't intervene in this public tongue lashing that Ishmael's wife delivered on me after I had worked for, 20, 30 hours on this project and thought I'd done quite a good job. So I became rather upset about that and decided to have kind of a chip on my shoulder about it, which was really quite silly, but typical of a young, impetuous male. So I left the Sangha, but I continued to sit on my own. And I had a close friend who remained in the Sangha, Glenn Friedman. And so we would often sit together, and then after a time, I moved to San Francisco, and I began sitting with another teacher from the same lineage, Joseph Bobro, who was a very different kind of guy than John Tarrant. But we had a small Sangha here. I ended up making friends in the Sangha and ended up rooming with one of them for a number of years. And also impetuous, kind of crazy young guy whose name was Nick. So at one point I was kind of frustrated with my life. And I knew about Ishmael something peculiar, which was that Ishmael had decided to do what the Buddha did, which was simply to go sit at a tree until he can cut through the mind, the waking mind, till he achieves kensho, awakening, liberation. The word enlightenment is very confusing in English. I'm going to leave that one mostly alone. I think it's kind of wrong idea. But I'm not particularly educated, and I'm not a Zen teacher. But I've been sitting Zen for a long time. In any case, so one day, I was kind of frustrated with my life and my failure to progress in Zen, especially since I was quite sure when I began that I was going to be excellent at this. I was going to bust through these koans like no problem. Boy, did I have that backwards. In any case, a couple of things, I did a couple of things. And the first one was that I suggested to my teacher, Joe, that maybe I should just go do this thing that the Buddha did and sit at a tree until I awaken. He said, no, don't do that. And I didn't really understand why that would not be a good thing to do. Ishmael did it, seemed to work for him. The Buddha did it, good enough for him, but not good for me? Why not? Now, of course, a Zen teacher doesn't really teach anything, though they give mondos or talks sometimes. So I didn't really understand why he said no, but he was very clear about it. He said, no, you're quite confused right now. Do not do this thing. And really what I was talking about was giving up all my possessions, right, and my job and so on, and just going and sitting at the tree. He said, don't do this. But the actual point of all of that introduction was one day I became very concerned with the idea of what is the most important question. And I presented this to my Zen teacher at one point because I figured there must be such a thing, right? There must be such a thing as the most important question. And I don't really recall what he said when I asked him, what is the most important question? But I found, again, I was quite staggered at his response. In typical Zen fashion, whether or not he said these particular words, he said something like, well, it isn't that one. And I was staggered. Because in a way, if you think there's a hierarchy of the importance of questions, what is the most important question must be at the top of the hierarchy. He did not seem to think so. And so I was thinking about this a bit this evening, and I was curious about it. And particularly his response, well, it isn't that one. I wasn't thinking it was that one, but I did think that there was one, right? There must be one. And surely my Zen teacher knows what this one is, and will tell me if I ask him, and then I will know what the most important question to chase is. Now, of course, I'm much older now. I'm probably older than either of those teachers were when I met them. And one of my friends joined John Terence Sangha and worked through the koan study very quickly and became a Roshi in his own right. And I've sat with him a few times, Daniel Terregno. He knew my mother and my son's mother, and he used to tend bar at a dance club I used to go to a lot called the Daily Planet in Santa Rosa. And so anyway, what about this question? What is the most important question? Well, here's the problem, or here's a problem. And there's a big deal about the difference between these words and the, right? If we only understood that it's incredibly rare that there is a the answer. This can be confusing because if we're working equations in arithmetic, for example, or other parts of mathematics, there is a the, involved. There's the correct resolution of an equation. But an equation is a complex representational thing. And sometimes, even in math, there are multiple answers. But why do we think there's a the answer to things? Because the means just one correct answer. So when I was asking Joe, what's the most important question, I was doubling down on this one. There's just one idea, right? I was saying the most important question. I didn't ask him what is a important question or an important question. I wanted to know what is the important question. And I think Joe was very aware that I was intellectual. And partly because I'm intellectual, I have certain gifts and certain geases. Right? A geas is kind of the opposite of a gift. And Joe knew that I was very thinky, and he could see that I'm bringing my thinkiness to my Zen practice. And also, he probably saw the same thing when I said, why don't I just go sit at a tree? He saw, Darren is having thoughts. He is thinking things. This will not help him. Not in this endeavor. In some parts of life, this will be helpful for Darren, but in the endeavor of awakening, a lot of thinking and abstraction is not only is not going to be helpful, it will be an impediment, a powerful impediment. So I think he saw this, but he also saw that I was being very abstract, right? Meaning representation of things without a connection to context, abstract. And so he saw somehow that I was confused, and I was coming to him to try to validate my confused ideas so that I could then go along chasing them. And he said, no, don't do this. This will not turn out well. And I think he's right. Now, I never gave up on sitting zazen, and I never gave up on chasing questions. But here's the thing about the most important question. The most important question is a religion, right? It's a religion we have, or we can have, where we think there's one question that is more important than all others. Well, here's the problem. What's the context? In relation to what? From what perspective or with what purpose or purposes does the question gain importance? And if we think that there's just one most important question, we become very confused. There may even be, for us, in our lives, an urgency, a mysterious urgency in our soul. But it's not simply one question. It's more like a constellation of urgencies that may produce the child of a question. But that child is not the constellation, even though it's their progeny. Yeah, they produce it, they catalyze it. So, right now I'm out for a walk. What's the most important question right now? Or what is a important question or an important question right now? Well, for me it is the question of, why is there not a most important question? Let that ring for a moment. There's lots of different ways of answering. There's not a most important answer to this, why is there not a most important question? Same problem, it's abstract. In what context? For who? Doing what? Where in their life? When in their life? When in their adventure of the expression and formation of karma? Where are they? Because in contexts, in relationships, in situations in which we find ourselves in the waking world, the questions that are useful or good are informed by the situations that we compose for ourselves and find ourselves in. And they're going to be unique from person to person. Now, the big questions, right? What is the nature of reality or the universe? Again, it's a problem because what we really want, what would be very useful for humans, is for someone to lead us away from this one answer problem we keep having. One question, one answer. We were trained to think this way, but what we want are 7 different answers, each more beautiful than the last, each one informing and transforming the others. What we want are a circle of answers, like the spokes on a wheel, and the hub of the wheel, and the rim of the wheel. Yeah. So that we get insight, at least across the plane, because that can be expanded to a sphere. And we can introduce time and now get very complex, beautiful insight and understanding and awareness without having an answer. Thankfully, we don't have, it's like asking, what's the most important finger? Well, what's the most important appendage? Well, there are those who might answer these questions, but they'd be confused because the importance of fingers depends on all kinds of things. Hands and what we intend to do with them and so on and so forth. And our minds are much like this. And there's an aspect of our mind, faculties involved in our representational cognition, that are not trustworthy and want a single derivative that's graspable so that they can claim to know and have this solved and be done with it, and so on. But the truly deep questions about the nature of origin and being and time and lives and death and birth and living beings and living places and intelligence and language and all of these things, what would be useful is 5 or 6 significant answers that each help us to understand new features of the very mysterious, deeply complex, eternally mysterious nature of all of these things. Because most of these important things or reference that I'm using words to point toward, not only are they deep and infinitely deep and mysterious, meaning you can always get a new array of even better answers. You can always do this without end. Unless you think there's one. In which case what happens is you find one you like, you get married to it, and the question dies. Now you no longer have the question, you believe that you know the answer. The answer. This is most unfortunate. In simple matters, this is useful. In matters of great import or depth, this is a catastrophe. This is an apocalypse of intelligence. Now, surely my Zen teacher had some awareness of the things that I'm speaking of here. But he was trying to warn me against reducing my body, if the analogy of my mind is my body, he didn't want me to reduce that body to 1 digit on the end of my pinky. Right? I think this is the important question. And of course, we could offer various positions on this. Like we could say, well, I'm not sure what the most important question is, but the aspect of your being that is urgently curious and formulates questions, to know its nature, to experientially know in a deep and abiding and constantly expanding way, to know its nature, this would be a profound thing to have awareness of. Like that. So, almost folding the question back on itself. Who is asking? You want to know what the most important question is, but do you know who is asking? And if I say, well, Darren is asking, and my Zen teacher says, well, show me this Darren. Where is it? I could point at my body, and he would say, no. I mean, he would say, yes, that's your body, but where is Darren? Is Darren just your body? And on and on. Right? Until I could show something of insight that would overcome all abstraction. Do away with it completely. And so then you could form the question, well, how do I do away with all abstraction? How do I do away with this mind that keeps asking questions and wants descriptions and representations and models and equations and such? And there are answers to that question, but fundamentally it's a problematical question because it's like abstraction wanting to overcome itself with abstractions. It won't work. Right? The thing we form the problem with, we need to find its root and deal with that root directly. And thus, not put an end to the tree of questions that we may have, but the experience of deep awakening or kensho, moksha, this experience often resolves the myriad questions that the representational consciousness is inclined to form. And it does not resolve them by answering them so much as by presenting an experience so profound, timeless and infinite, that these questions are understood to be relatively trivial. We may still pursue some of them, but compared to that which puts an end to the dominance of representational cognition in our thought and awareness, these questions are quite trivial. And yet we may keep forming them. So, I think the most useful experience I've had is a situation where I could continue to ask a single question and I would be shown something more astonishing than anything I'd ever imagined each time it was answered, and there would be wild new features of the second answer that transformed the first answer in fascinating and beautiful and trustworthy ways, and so on. And so I could just keep asking one question, and if it were a deep question, then my teacher, in this case, who wasn't a human being, would reply with new perspectives and depth and astonishing new vistas of understanding and awareness. As if, again, like spokes on a wheel, where the wheel becomes a sphere and the sphere becomes a hypersphere and so on, each time one approaches a beautiful question, such as, where did human intelligence come from? Why does it exist? What is its history? But I still like my Zen teacher's response, even if I can't remember it directly. The response of, What is the most important question? Well, it isn't that one. This really cuts the head off the monster, and this is a monster that wants to grow many heads. So I'm grateful for my old teachers and their insight. And I'm still a very thinky person in my way. And I still have questions, and I'm still curious about the most important question. Even though I understand that a better formulation, if we really want to ask a good question, we should pause and carefully formulate for quite some time before we allow the question to escape our lips. Because if we will pause and slow down and take deep matters into consideration before we pose the question, then we are better positioned to learn and make discoveries and experience insight. I'm a fan of Quora. I like Quora a lot. Although it's become a bit, as all such products and institutions and algorithms do, it's become affected by its own complexities and design and such at this late date. But it's a great place to go to ask questions and have people who know something about the topic answer them. And that's a very powerfully useful thing. There's all kinds of useful things about that. But I used to see very naive questions quite commonly. And at first I was a bit reactive. I would see a question like, I keep dreaming about my girlfriend's boyfriend. What does this mean? It's not the kind of question we can't respond to. We can make some stuff up. But what we really need to know is more of the content of the dream, and also a lot more about the person asking the question. Or I would see questions like, what does this word mean? Some word. And of course, there are dictionary answers. But the word has different meanings depending on who's using it and where and how and why and what the context is. So the word doesn't mean one thing. And a lot of the questions are posed as if there's just a single answer, someone knows it, won't you tell me? When in fact, the mystery of life and thought and all these things is not like this. It's not like this. So I used to be a little frustrated sometimes, and sometimes I would respond and explain. Some people would say, what does it mean if I dream of a snake? Well, we need to know a lot more about you, what's been going on in your life lately, what happened yesterday. Tell me about your interactions with a snake, all kinds of things. It doesn't mean something to dream of a snake. It's too abstract. It's like asking what's the most important question. It's way too abstract to encompass the actual novelty and uniqueness in an actual situation in human experience. Why is there not a most important question? Well, there could be. We could take one up. We could have a most important question for ourselves. One of my friends, and many of the people that I've known who are gentle souls in this life, they have a fundamental question that I think is good. It's not that it's easily formed in language, but we can form it in language. Clumsily. Why is there injustice? Why is there something that resembles evil or malignancy on earth? Why is there cancer? I guess the cancer idea just came from the word malignant, right? That's an association I have with that word. I don't think cancer is evil, or even really malignant, except in the clinical sense. Cancer is one of the ways that the Earth controls human populations. And that's not the answer. There are much more. It's an infinite question. It's infinitely deep. There's no end to the question of why is there cancer, or how could we understand cancer more adeptly and insightfully. That's an infinitely long ladder. There's no end to that ladder. And in fact, if we could understand any single aspect of life, we would understand probably not everything, but it would radically improve our understandings of all other things, because all of the things are linked together in a transcendental unity. So that if we could just understand any one thing with great depth, all of our other understandings would transform in the light of this awareness. I used to have this kind of fascinating daydream where I thought, if I could just deeply understand a penny, one penny, all of the secrets of the universe would be revealed to me. Because part of me, some aspect of my being, knew that if you could deeply understand one thing, it could even be a very trivial thing like a penny, that understanding would affect all other aspects of identity, of transformation, of origin, of endings. And so I reflect on these matters together with you tonight. Let us maintain the awareness of the limitations of representational thought. Very useful in a very narrow scope of our human experience, the experience of our souls, our life paths, our karma. Very narrow representational thought. And all of the questions remain infinite. So again, what we want are 5 astonishing answers, each different, that each reflect unique facets of the question, so that each of the facets is transformed by the others. This is what real intelligence looks like to me. Now, of course, that's an abstract description, and it's very general. But it's much better than the one answer idea. Right? It's a definite improvement on there is an answer to this question. And you can see how many religions have gotten here, right? There is an answer. The answer is the Word of God. The Word of God is the Bible. We're done. Right? That's all we need to know. That's all we need to consider. It's pretty weird since language is interpreted, and context in the interpreter matters, so I think those people are quite confused. Whenever people become extremely doctrinally rigid, right? It's a sign their mind is dying. Yeah? It's dying in the grip of a narrative. And it's very easy to lose the faculties that we bring to our birth in this way, and to inhibit or impede them or amputate them. And this is one of the truly frightening problems we face in ever newer modes and ways as the children of the era in which we now exist. If you have a good question, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.